In the quiet suburbs of Westminster, Colorado, on a cold October morning in 2012, a mother watched her 10-year-old daughter walk out the front door for the last time. What she didn't know was that evil was waiting just around the corner, wearing a face no one would suspect. This is the story of Jessica Ridgeway, and what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. Welcome to Cold Crime Case. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most devastating cases in Colorado history. But before we begin this journey together, I need something from you. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, if you think victims like Jessica deserve to have their voices heard, then hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what case you want covered next, and subscribe to Cold Crime Case so you never miss an investigation. These cases matter. Your support matters. Now, let's uncover the truth about what happened on that October morning. The morning of October 5th, 2012 began like any other Friday in Westminster, Colorado. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, dusting the streets and rooftops with a thin layer of white that sparkled under the early morning sun. Inside a modest home on the west side of town, a 10-year-old girl stirred awake to the sound of her alarm clock. It was a small thing, that alarm clock, but it represented something important to Jessica Ridgeway. It represented independence. It represented growing up. It represented the trust her mother, Sarah, had placed in her to take responsibility for getting herself ready for school. Jessica Christine Ridgeway wasn't just any 10-year-old girl. She was special in ways that everyone who knew her recognized immediately. Born on January 23, 2002, Jessica came into this world with what her family described as an old soul. Even as a toddler, she seemed to understand things beyond her years. She had a maturity that surprised adults. Yet she never lost that pure, uninhibited joy that makes childhood magical. She could be serious one moment, discussing topics that seemed far too complex for her age, and then, in the next breath, she'd be giggling uncontrollably at something silly, her laughter filling every corner of the room. Her mother, Sarah Ridgeway, was a young single mom who worked hard to provide for Jessica. Sarah had become pregnant with Jessica as a teenager. And from the moment she held her baby girl, she dedicated her life to being the best mother she could be. The bond between Sarah and Jessica was extraordinarily close. They weren't just mother and daughter, they were best friends. They shared everything with each other. They had inside jokes, special traditions, and a connection that went beyond words. Sarah worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Money was always tight, but Sarah made sure Jessica never felt like she was missing out on anything important. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes and carefully chosen gifts. Holidays were filled with traditions that Sarah created to make their small family feel complete. And every single day, Sarah told Jessica how much she loved her, how proud she was of her, how special she was. Jessica's personality was a beautiful contradiction of traits that somehow worked perfectly together. She was independent and confident, yet also sensitive and caring. She loved fashion and would spend hours planning her outfits, mixing and matching clothes to create looks that expressed her personality. Purple was her favorite color, and she incorporated it into her wardrobe whenever she could. She had strong opinions about what she liked and didn't like, and she wasn't afraid to express those opinions. But Jessica was also incredibly kind and empathetic. She noticed when other kids were sad or left out, and she would go out of her way to include them. She stood up for kids who were being bullied. She was the type of child who would give her lunch to a classmate who forgot theirs, even if it meant she'd be hungry. Teachers at her school, Witt Elementary, consistently praised her for her kindness and her strong sense of right and wrong. Jessica loved animals with a passion that bordered on obsession. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian when she grew up. She would rescue injured birds and try to nurse them back to health. She begged her mother for a pet, and when they finally got a small dog, Jessica took her responsibilities as a pet owner seriously. She fed the dog, walked it, and played with it for hours. That dog became her constant companion, and Jessica would tell anyone who would listen about her plans to have a house full of animals someday. School was another passion for Jessica. She loved learning, especially reading and writing. She devoured books, often reading late into the night with a flashlight under her covers when she was supposed to be sleeping. She kept journals where she wrote stories, poems, and observations about the world around her. Her teachers said she had real talent as a writer, that her ability to express herself on paper was remarkable for her age. Jessica had a group of close friends at school, girls she'd known since kindergarten. They did everything together during lunch and recess, sharing secrets, playing games, and making the kind of memories that shape childhood. They had sleepovers where they stayed up too late eating junk food and watching movies. They passed notes in class when they thought the teacher wasn't looking. They made friendship bracelets for each other and promised to be best friends forever. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Jessica was her determination to grow up and be independent. She didn't want to be babied or treated like she was fragile. When she was 9 years old, she asked her mother if she could walk to school by herself. Sarah was hesitant at first. Westminster was generally a safe community, but Sarah knew that dangers existed everywhere, and the thought of letting her baby girl walk alone terrified her. They compromised. Jessica could walk to the end of their street, where she would meet up with other kids from the neighborhood who also walked to school. They would walk together in a group, safety in numbers. The walk was only about a mile, and the route took them through a quiet residential area where neighbors knew each other and looked out for one another's children. Sarah made Jessica promise to never talk to strangers, to stay with her group, and to go straight to school without any detours. For several months, this arrangement worked perfectly. Jessica would leave the house each morning, walk to the meeting spot, and join her friends for the walk to Witt Elementary. Sarah would watch from the window until Jessica turned the corner and disappeared from view. Every afternoon, Jessica would reverse the journey, arriving home safely and full of stories about her day. Jessica loved this routine. It made her feel grown up and responsible. She took pride in the fact that her mother trusted her enough to let her walk to school. She never missed the meeting spot, never deviated from the agreed-upon route, never gave her mother any reason to worry. Until October 5th, 2012. That morning started normally. Jessica's alarm went off at 6:45 in the morning, just as it did every school day. She turned it off and climbed out of bed, proud of herself for waking up on her own. She shuffled into the living room where her mother was already awake, getting ready for her own day. They exchanged good mornings, and Jessica settled onto the couch to watch a bit of television while she woke up fully. Sarah made breakfast, nothing fancy, just the usual cereal and juice that Jessica liked. They sat together at the small kitchen table, Jessica chatting about the day ahead. She had a project due in one of her classes, and she was excited to turn it in because she'd worked really hard on it. Sarah listened, asking questions, engaging with her daughter in the easy, comfortable way they always did. After breakfast, Jessica went to her room to get dressed. She chose her outfit carefully, as she always did. She pulled on a pair of jeans and a purple jacket, her favorite color. She grabbed her backpack, which was already packed and ready to go from the night before. Jessica was organized like that, always preparing ahead so she wouldn't be rushed in the morning. The weather outside was cold. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, and while it wasn't a heavy snow, it was enough to make the morning feel crisp and wintry. Sarah reminded Jessica to bundle up warm. Jessica nodded and grabbed her winter gear. She pulled on the purple jacket, zipped it up to her chin, and then added a scarf and gloves. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time, adjusted her backpack on her shoulders, and declared herself ready. Sarah walked her to the door, as she did every morning. They hugged, and Sarah told Jessica she loved her. Jessica said she loved her mother too, and then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold October morning. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched her daughter walk down the sidewalk toward the corner where she would meet her friends. Jessica walked with confidence, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. She turned the corner, gave her mother one last wave, and disappeared from view. That was the last time Sarah Ridgeway saw her daughter alive. Sarah closed the door and went about her morning routine, getting ready for work. She had no reason to worry. Jessica had walked this route dozens of times without incident. The neighborhood was safe. Other kids would be at the meeting spot. Everything was normal. Everything was fine, except it wasn't. At Witt Elementary School, the morning bell rang at 8:45. Teachers took attendance in their classrooms. In Jessica's classroom, her teacher marked her absent. This wasn't particularly alarming at first. Kids got sick. Families overslept. There were 100 innocent reasons why a child might miss school on any given day. The teacher made a note and continued with the day's lessons. But then, around noon, the school received a phone call that changed everything. It was Sarah Ridgeway, and she was frantic. She had just received a call from the school's automated attendance system informing her that Jessica had been marked absent. Sarah was confused and increasingly panicked. She told the school administrator that Jessica had left for school that morning, just like she always did. She should have been there. Where was she? The school administrator checked again. No, Jessica definitely hadn't been in class that morning. She hadn't been seen anywhere on campus. Sarah's panic turned to terror. She immediately left work and raced home. Maybe Jessica had felt sick during the walk and turned around. Maybe she was at home, lying in bed with a stomach bug. But when Sarah burst through the front door, calling Jessica's name, she was met with silence. Jessica wasn't there. Sarah grabbed her phone and started calling everyone she could think of. She called the parents of Jessica's friends who walked to school with her. None of them had seen Jessica that morning. She hadn't shown up at the meeting spot. The other kids had waited for a few minutes, but when Jessica didn't appear, they assumed she was sick or running late and continued to school without her. Sarah called other neighbors. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. By early afternoon, Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. Her daughter wouldn't just disappear. Jessica was responsible and rule-following. If she'd felt sick, she would have come home. If there had been a change of plans, she would have found a way to let her mother know. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed 911. The call came in to the Westminster Police Department at 1:09 in the afternoon. A frantic mother reporting her 10-year-old daughter missing. The dispatcher took down the information. Jessica Ridgeway, 10 years old, 4 feet 9 inches tall, approximately 80 pounds, long blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing a purple jacket, jeans, and carrying a backpack with a purple peace sign. She had left home at 8:40 that morning to walk to school and never arrived. The Westminster Police Department immediately recognized the severity of the situation. A 10-year-old child missing for over 4 hours. Every law enforcement officer knows that the first hours in a missing child case are absolutely critical. The longer a child is missing, the less likely the outcome will be positive. Statistics show that in cases where children are abducted and murdered, the vast majority are killed within the first 3 hours. Officers were immediately dispatched to the Ridgeway home and to the route Jessica would have taken to school. A massive search operation was mobilized with stunning speed. Within hours, every available officer from the Westminster Police Department was involved. Neighboring police departments offered assistance. The FBI's Denver field office was notified, and agents were dispatched to the scene. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. When word spread that a little girl was missing, hundreds of volunteers showed up to help search. Neighbors, friends, complete strangers, all united by the desperate need to find Jessica. They organized into search teams and fanned out across the neighborhood, calling Jessica's name, checking yards, peering into parked cars, looking in drainage ditches and behind dumpsters. Search and rescue teams with trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were given items of Jessica's clothing to get her scent, and then they worked the route from her home toward the school. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew overhead, scanning the area for any sign of the missing girl. Every available resource was being thrown at this search. Sarah Ridgeway was beside herself with anguish. She sat in her living room, surrounded by police officers asking her question after question. They needed to know everything about Jessica. Who were her friends? Had she been upset about anything? Had there been any arguments at home? Had she ever run away before? Was there anyone who might want to hurt her? Any family members or acquaintances who had shown inappropriate interest in her? Sarah answered every question as best she could through her tears. No, Jessica had never run away. She was happy. She loved school. There had been no arguments. Sarah racked her brain trying to think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt her daughter, but she couldn't think of anyone. Jessica was just a normal, happy 10-year-old girl. Who would want to hurt a child? The police interviewed Jessica's friends and their parents. They spoke with teachers and school staff. They talked to every neighbor on Jessica's street and along her walking route. They reviewed footage from any security cameras in the area, though there weren't many in this residential neighborhood. They checked registered sex offenders in the area and began conducting interviews with anyone who had a record of crimes against children. As day turned to evening and evening turned to night, the search continued. Volunteers with flashlights combed through parks and open spaces. The temperature dropped as night fell, and everyone was thinking the same terrifying thought. If Jessica was outside somewhere, injured or trapped, would she survive the cold? The media descended on Westminster. Jessica's disappearance was the lead story on every local news station. Her school photo, showing a smiling blonde girl with bright blue eyes, was displayed on television screens across Colorado. The Amber Alert system was activated, sending notifications to phones throughout the region. Billboards along highways displayed Jessica's face and information. The message was clear and urgent. A child is missing. If you've seen her, if you know anything, please come forward. Sarah made a tearful plea on television that evening. Standing in front of cameras, her face pale and streaked with tears, she begged whoever had her daughter to please bring her home. She told Jessica, wherever she was, that Mommy loved her and was coming to find her. The image of that devastated mother, pleading for her child's safe return, was broadcast across the nation. People who had never heard of Westminster, Colorado, now knew Jessica Ridgeway's name and face. The first night was agony. Sarah didn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She sat by the phone, praying it would ring with good news. Police officers remained at her home around the clock, ready to respond to any tip or development. Volunteers continued searching through the night, refusing to give up hope. By the next morning, Saturday, October 6th, Jessica had been missing for nearly 24 hours. The search intensified even further. More volunteers arrived. The search area was expanded. Every shed, every abandoned building, every vehicle was checked and rechecked. Divers were brought in to search retention ponds in the area. The efforts were exhaustive and comprehensive. Tips poured into the police department. People reported seeing a girl who looked like Jessica at various locations. Each tip was investigated. Most led nowhere. Cases of mistaken identity or well-meaning but inaccurate information. But every single tip was taken seriously and followed up on because you never knew which piece of information might be the one that mattered. The FBI brought in additional resources. Behavioral analysts created a profile of who might abduct a child in this manner. Was this a stranger abduction? A family member? Someone who knew Jessica? The different scenarios had different implications for where she might be and what might have happened to her. Investigators looked closely at Jessica's family, as they always do in missing child cases. Statistics show that in the majority of child abduction cases, the perpetrator is someone known to the child, often a family member. Sarah fully cooperated with the investigation, understanding that police had to examine every possibility. She submitted to interviews and even took a polygraph test, which she passed. Jessica's father, who had limited involvement in her life, was located and questioned. He was cleared as well. The focus then shifted to registered sex offenders in the area. There were several, and each one was interviewed and asked to account for their whereabouts on the morning of October 5th. Their homes were searched, their vehicles were examined, their electronic devices were analyzed. This was painstaking work, but investigators knew that these individuals represented the highest risk to children in the community. Meanwhile, the community of Westminster was gripped by fear. Parents who had previously allowed their children to walk to school or play outside unsupervised now kept them under constant watch. Schools increased security. Neighborhood watch programs went into overdrive. People eyed strangers with suspicion. The sense of safety that had characterized this quiet suburban community had been shattered. Vigils were held for Jessica. Hundreds of people gathered in parks and outside her school, holding candles and praying for her safe return. Her classmates made posters and signs. Her teachers spoke about what a wonderful student she was. Friends shared memories of playing with her, of her kindness, of her infectious laugh. The community rallied around the Ridgeway family, dropping off meals, offering support, doing whatever they could to help. But as Sunday arrived, and Jessica had been missing for more than 48 hours, the grim reality began to set in. The chances of finding her alive were diminishing with each passing hour. Still, no one wanted to give up hope. Sarah continued to believe that her daughter would be found, that she would come home, that this nightmare would end. Then, on Monday morning, October 8th, 3 days after Jessica disappeared, a horrifying discovery was made. A woman was walking her dog in a park in Arvada, a town about 10 miles from Westminster. The park, Patridge Open Space, was a quiet area with walking trails and open grassland. As the woman walked along a trail, her dog suddenly pulled away from her, straining at the leash and heading toward a grassy area off the path. The woman followed her dog and saw something lying in the grass. At first, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Then the horrifying realization hit her. It was a human torso. Just a torso. No head, no arms, no legs. The woman screamed and ran, calling 911 with shaking hands. Police rushed to the scene. What they found was beyond disturbing. The remains were those of a child, roughly the size and age of Jessica Ridgeway. The body had been dismembered with chilling precision. This was no accident, no animal attack. This was a deliberate, calculated act of violence. The body parts had been carefully removed and were nowhere to be found at this location. The coroner's office was called in. A thorough search of the surrounding area was conducted, but no other remains were found at that location. The torso was transported for autopsy and identification. Given the size and apparent age of the remains, and the fact that Jessica Ridgeway was the only missing child in the area, investigators had little doubt about whose body they had found. But they needed scientific confirmation. The identification process took time. Without a head or hands, visual identification was impossible. DNA testing would be required. In the meantime, police didn't immediately release information to the public about what had been found. They wanted to notify the family first, and they wanted to be absolutely certain of the identification before making any announcements. Sarah Ridgeway was brought in and told that remains believed to be Jessica's had been found. The details of the condition of the body were shared with her, though officers tried to be as gentle as possible in delivering this unimaginable news. Sarah collapsed. The last flickering hope that her daughter might somehow still be alive was extinguished. Her worst nightmare had been confirmed. On October 10th, the Westminster Police Department held a press conference. Chief Lee Burke stood before a sea of reporters and cameras and delivered the news that everyone had been dreading. Remains found in Arvada had been positively identified through DNA as belonging to Jessica Ridgeway. The 10-year-old girl who had disappeared while walking to school 5 days earlier was dead. The chief provided limited details about the condition of the body, only saying that Jessica had been the victim of a homicide and that the case was being investigated as such. He didn't mention the dismemberment, not wanting to release those graphic details publicly. He asked for anyone with information to please come forward. He assured the community that every resource was being devoted to finding whoever was responsible for this heinous crime. The reaction to the news was one of collective grief and horror. This wasn't supposed to happen in Westminster. Children weren't supposed to be snatched off the street in broad daylight. Innocent 10-year-old girls weren't supposed to be murdered and dismembered. The sense of violation and fear that gripped the community was palpable. Schools brought in grief counselors. Jessica's classmates and teachers struggled to process the loss. Many of them had held out hope that she would be found alive. Now they had to grapple with the reality that their friend, their student, was gone forever, and that she had died in the most horrific way imaginable. The investigation now shifted from a search and rescue operation to a homicide investigation, and it was like nothing investigators had dealt with before. The level of violence, the dismemberment, the apparent lack of any connection between Jessica and her killer, all pointed to a predator who was extremely dangerous. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a profile of the likely offender. Based on the nature of the crime, they believed the perpetrator was likely male, probably in his late teens to 30s, someone who had a sexual interest in children and who had progressed to acting on those impulses in the most violent way possible. The dismemberment suggested some level of sophistication and planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was calculated and deliberate. The search for the rest of Jessica's remains became a priority. If they could find where the dismemberment had taken place, it might provide crucial evidence. Searches were conducted throughout Arvada and the surrounding areas. Trash receptacles were searched. Dumpsters were examined. Any place where someone might dispose of body parts was investigated. But the missing remains, Jessica's head, arms, and legs, were not found in those initial searches. Then, on October 19th, nearly 2 weeks after Jessica disappeared, another disturbing discovery was made. This time, it was in Superior, Colorado, another town several miles from both Westminster and Arvada. Workers at a wastewater treatment facility discovered something horrifying in one of the collection areas: human remains. More specifically, body parts that would later be identified as belonging to Jessica Ridgeway. The discovery location was significant. The remains were found in a crawl space underneath a home that was under construction in a subdivision. The crawl space was accessible from outside the home, and it appeared that someone had deliberately placed the remains there, possibly attempting to hide them, but also creating a gruesome shrine of sorts. With this discovery, investigators now had a better picture of what had happened to Jessica's body after her murder. The killer had dismembered her, kept or disposed of some parts in one location, and placed others in a completely different area. This level of mobility and planning suggested someone who had transportation and who felt comfortable moving around the area. It also suggested someone who was familiar with these different towns and locations. At the same time as the investigation into Jessica's murder was proceeding, something else was happening that would eventually break the case wide open. On October 24th, nearly 3 weeks after Jessica's disappearance, another attack occurred, this time in the town of Kettner. A 22-year-old woman was jogging along a trail when someone came up behind her and placed a cloth soaked in chemicals over her mouth and nose, attempting to render her unconscious. But this intended victim fought back hard. She was an adult, not a small child, and she was strong and determined. She struggled violently with her attacker, managing to pull the cloth away from her face and turn to look at him. She saw his face clearly. He was young, maybe a teenager, wearing dark clothing. When he realized she'd seen his face and wasn't being subdued easily, he panicked and ran. The woman immediately called police and reported the attack. She provided a detailed description of her attacker. Police took the cloth, which the woman had managed to hold onto during the struggle, as evidence. It would later test positive for chemicals consistent with attempting to render someone unconscious. Investigators began to wonder if this attack might be connected to Jessica's abduction and murder. The use of chemicals to subdue the victim was unusual. The fact that it happened relatively close to where Jessica had disappeared was concerning. Could the same person who killed Jessica have attempted to abduct another victim? If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The woman who was attacked worked with a sketch artist to create a composite drawing of her attacker. The sketch showed a young man with distinctive features. When the sketch was released to the public, tips started coming in. Multiple people called to say that the sketch looked like a teenager named Austin Sigg who lived in the area. Austin Reed Sigg was 17 years old. He lived with his mother in Westminster, not far from where Jessica Ridgeway had disappeared. He was a high school student, quiet and socially awkward, but not someone who had ever been in serious trouble with the law. He had no criminal record. He wasn't on anyone's radar as a dangerous individual, but the tips kept coming in. Multiple independent people all saying the same thing. The sketch looked like Austin Sigg. Police began investigating him. They learned that he lived very close to Jessica's route to school. They learned that he had been home the morning Jessica disappeared. They learned that he had access to a vehicle. All of these things were concerning, but not proof of anything. Then something remarkable happened. On October 23rd, Austin Sigg's mother called the police. She had seen the composite sketch. She had heard the description of the attacker. And with a mother's worst nightmare of intuition, she suspected it might be her son. She told police that Austin had been acting strangely. She had seen scratches on his arms that he couldn't or wouldn't explain. She had noticed that he had been doing a lot of cleaning, particularly of the family car. Even more significantly, she told police that she thought she had smelled bleach coming from the crawl space under their home. The home happened to be in a subdivision in Superior, the same town where Jessica's remains had been found in a crawl space. She said Austin had claimed he was cleaning the crawl space, but she thought it was odd behavior. Based on this information and the other tips they'd received, investigators obtained a search warrant for the Sig home and property. On October 23rd, police descended on the modest house where Austin lived with his mother. Austin was home at the time. Police separated him from his mother and began searching the property. What they found was chilling. In Austin's bedroom, they discovered disturbing items. There were photographs of Jessica Ridgeway that he had taken from news reports and printed out. There were images on his computer of child pornography and violent sexual content. There were searches in his internet history about how to kidnap someone, how to subdue someone with chemicals, how to dismember a body. In the garage and in the crawl space under the home, investigators found evidence that was even more damning. There were traces of blood. There were tools that appeared to have been recently cleaned. There was plastic sheeting of the type that might be used to contain a body during dismemberment. The smell of bleach was overwhelming, indicating someone had tried very hard to clean and disinfect the area. Police also examined the family vehicle, a car that Austin had access to and frequently drove. In the trunk, despite efforts to clean it, forensic technicians found traces of blood. They found fibers that were consistent with Jessica's clothing. They found soil samples that would later be matched to the locations where her remains had been found. Austin Sig was taken into custody and brought to the police station for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Jessica Ridgeway. He said he had nothing to do with her disappearance or death. He offered explanations for the evidence police had found, saying the blood could be from a nosebleed, the searches on his computer were just curiosity, the cleaning of the car and crawl space was just normal maintenance. But as the interview continued and investigators presented more and more evidence, Austin's story began to crumble. He became quiet and withdrawn. Finally, after hours of questioning, Austin Sig did something that shocked even the experienced detectives in the room. He confessed, not just to Jessica's murder, but to everything, in graphic, disturbing detail. Austin explained that on the morning of October 5th, he had been driving through the neighborhood when he spotted Jessica walking alone. He said something inside him snapped. He had been having violent fantasies about children for some time, and suddenly he saw an opportunity to act on those fantasies. He pulled his car over and approached Jessica. Jessica, being a trusting and polite child, didn't immediately run when a teenager approached her. Austin told her that he needed help finding his lost dog and asked if she would help him look. Jessica, with her love of animals and her helpful nature, agreed. Austin led her to his car, saying the dog had run in a particular direction. Once he got her close to the vehicle, he grabbed her and forced her inside. He drove Jessica back to his home, pulling into the garage so neighbors wouldn't see him. His mother was at work. The house was empty. He took Jessica inside, down to the basement, and that's where he held her. He told investigators that Jessica was terrified, crying, begging to go home to her mother. But Austin had no intention of letting her go. The details of what Austin did to Jessica during the hours he held her are too disturbing to recount in full. Suffice it to say that she suffered tremendously before he killed her. He sexually assaulted her. He tortured her. And eventually, he strangled her to death with his hands. But even death didn't end Jessica's nightmare. Because then, Austin did something that demonstrates just how disturbed he truly was. He kept her body in the house overnight. The next day, after his mother had left for work, he went to the garage where he had tools and supplies. In that garage, he dismembered Jessica's small body. He cut off her head, her arms, her legs. He wrapped the parts separately in plastic bags. Over the following days, Austin disposed of Jessica's remains in different locations. He placed her torso in the park in Arvada, leaving it where he thought it might not be discovered for some time, or where, if it was discovered, it wouldn't be easily identified. He took other parts to the crawl space under a home that was being constructed in Superior. He chose that location because he thought construction workers wouldn't look in the crawl space, and by the time anyone did, the evidence would be degraded. He cleaned obsessively, using bleach and other chemicals to remove any trace of Jessica from his home, the garage, and the car. He burned some of Jessica's belongings, including her purple jacket and her backpack. He disposed of the tools he'd used for the dismemberment. He thought he had been careful. He thought he had gotten away with it. And then, less than 3 weeks later, the urge struck again. Austin saw the female jogger in Kettner and decided to try to abduct another victim. He prepared a cloth with chemicals, the same method he'd seen in movies and read about online. He approached her from behind and tried to render her unconscious. But she was stronger than a 10-year-old child, and she fought him off. That failed abduction attempt, and the victim's courage in fighting back and getting a good look at her attacker, is ultimately what led police to Austin. After his confession, Austin was charged with multiple counts, including first-degree murder, sexual assault of a child, and attempted kidnapping in connection with the attack on the jogger. He was 17 years old at the time of Jessica's murder, but given the heinous nature of the crime, prosecutors indicated they would charge him as an adult. The confession answered many questions about what had happened to Jessica, but it raised just as many new ones. Who was Austin Sigg? How does a 17-year-old become capable of such monstrous acts? What warning signs were missed? Could this have been prevented? Austin Reed Sigg was born on January 27, 1995, in Colorado. His early childhood appeared relatively normal. His parents divorced when he was young, and he lived primarily with his mother. Those who knew him as a child described him as quiet and somewhat shy, but not particularly troubled. As Austin entered his teenage years, however, things began to change. He became increasingly isolated and withdrawn. He spent most of his time alone in his room, on his computer. He had few friends and little interest in typical teenage activities. His grades, which had been decent in elementary school, began to decline. Teachers noted that he seemed disconnected and disengaged in class. Austin's internet activity, which investigators were able to piece together from his computer and online accounts, painted a disturbing picture of a young man spiraling into increasingly dark and violent fantasies. He frequented websites dedicated to violent and sexual content. He viewed child pornography. He participated in online forums where users discussed violent fantasies about children. He researched serial killers and studied their methods. Mental health experts, who later evaluated Austin, diagnosed him with several conditions, including sexual sadism disorder. This is a paraphilia in which an individual derives sexual gratification from inflicting pain, suffering, or humiliation on others. In Austin's case, this disorder manifested in fantasies about torturing and killing children. Experts also noted that Austin showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, characterized by a lack of empathy, disregard for right and wrong, and manipulative behavior. He understood intellectually that what he was doing was wrong and illegal, but he felt no genuine remorse or empathy for his victims. Jessica wasn't a real person to him. She was an object for him to use to fulfill his fantasies. The question of whether Austin's crimes could have been prevented is one that haunted everyone involved in the case. His mother, who cooperated fully with the investigation and prosecution, was devastated. She had known her son was troubled. She had seen his increasing isolation and his strange behavior. But she never imagined he was capable of something like this. In the months before Jessica's murder, Austin's mother had noticed some warning signs. He had killed animals, starting with small creatures like frogs and progressing to larger animals. This is a well-known warning sign for potential violence toward humans, one of the triad of behaviors, along with bedwetting and fire setting, that are sometimes seen in the childhood of individuals who later commit violent crimes. Austin's mother had tried to get him help. She had taken him to counselors and therapists, but Austin was good at hiding the true depth of his disturbance. He would tell therapists what they wanted to hear. He would minimize his issues or claim he was just going through typical teenage struggles. The mental health system, already overburdened and underfunded, failed to identify just how dangerous Austin truly was. There were other missed opportunities as well. School personnel had noted Austin's declining performance and his social isolation, but in a large public school system, it's easy for troubled students to fall through the cracks. No one recognized that Austin wasn't just a shy, awkward teenager going through a phase. He was a predator in the making, and the signs were there for anyone trained to see them. The case against Austin Sigg moved forward through the legal system. Given the overwhelming evidence, including his detailed confession, his attorneys knew that fighting the charges would be futile. Instead, they focused on trying to avoid the death penalty. Although Austin was 17 at the time of the murder, Colorado law allowed for juveniles to be tried as adults in certain circumstances, and this case certainly qualified. The decision of whether to seek the death penalty fell to the district attorney's office. It was an agonizing choice. On one hand, the crime was so heinous, so depraved, that many felt Austin deserved the ultimate punishment. The community was crying out for justice. Jessica's family was devastated beyond measure. The fear and trauma Austin had inflicted on the entire region was immeasurable. On the other hand, Austin had been 17 at the time of the crime, technically still a minor. There were questions about brain development in teenagers and their capacity for judgment and impulse control. There was also the practical consideration that death penalty cases take years, sometimes decades, to work their way through the appeals process, which would mean prolonged agony for Jessica's family. After careful consideration and consultation with Jessica's family, prosecutors decided not to seek the death penalty. Instead, they would push for life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah Ridgeway, despite her unimaginable grief, supported this decision. She didn't want to spend the next 20 or 30 years attending appeals hearings and reliving her daughter's murder over and over again. She wanted Austin locked away forever, where he could never hurt another child. And then she wanted to try to find some way to move forward with her life. In November 2013, more than a year after Jessica's murder, Austin Sigg appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. He had pleaded guilty to all charges, sparing Jessica's family the trauma of a trial. The courtroom was packed with Jessica's loved ones, community members, and media from across the country. The prosecution presented their case, detailing the horrific nature of Austin's crimes. They showed photographs of Jessica, a smiling, vibrant child full of life and promise. They contrasted those images with crime scene photos that demonstrated the brutality of what had been done to her. They called witnesses who spoke about the impact of Jessica's death on her family and community. Sarah Ridgeway took the stand to give her victim impact statement. It was one of the most gut-wrenching moments anyone in that courtroom had ever witnessed. Sarah, her face gaunt from grief and lack of sleep, spoke directly to Austin. She told him about the daughter he had stolen from her. She described Jessica's laugh, her dreams, her kindness. She told him about the hole in her heart that would never heal, about the birthdays and holidays and milestones that would forever be marked by Jessica's absence. Sarah described what it was like to identify her daughter's body, or what was left of it. She talked about the nightmares that plagued her every night, visions of what Jessica must have suffered in her final hours. She spoke about the guilt she carried, wondering if things might have been different if she hadn't let Jessica walk to school alone, even though she knew rationally that she had done nothing wrong. Other family members spoke as well. Jessica's grandmother talked about the special bond she had shared with her granddaughter and how she would never get to see Jessica grow up, graduate, fall in love, have children of her own. Jessica's friends, now teenagers themselves, spoke about the fear and trauma that had affected their entire generation of children in Westminster. They talked about losing their innocence, about being afraid to walk anywhere alone, about the constant awareness that evil could be lurking around any corner. The defense presented their case as well, though there was little they could say to mitigate what Austin had done. They talked about his mental illness, about the dysfunction in his brain that led him to commit such horrific acts. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about adolescent brain development and impulse control. They argued that while Austin needed to be punished and removed from society, he was still technically a juvenile at the time of the crime, and that should be considered. Austin himself was given the opportunity to speak. He stood before the court, showing little emotion, and offered what could only be described as a hollow apology. He said he was sorry for what he had done, that he knew it was wrong, that he wished he could take it back. But his words rang false. There was no genuine remorse in his voice, no real understanding of the magnitude of the pain he had caused. He seemed to be reciting lines he thought he should say, rather than expressing any real feeling. The judge, presiding over one of the most difficult cases of his career, listened to everything presented. Then he delivered his ruling. He sentenced Austin Reed Sigg to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jessica Ridgeway. He added additional sentences for the sexual assault and for the attempted kidnapping of the jogger in Kettner. In total, Austin received multiple life sentences plus additional years, ensuring that he would never walk free again. As the sentence was read, there was a collective exhale in the courtroom. Justice, in a legal sense, had been served. Austin Sigg would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He would never harm another child. He would grow old and die in prison. But for Sarah Ridgeway and everyone who loved Jessica, the sentence brought no real comfort. It couldn't bring Jessica back. It couldn't undo the horror of what had happened to her. It was necessary, but it wasn't enough, because nothing could ever be enough. Austin was transferred to a maximum security prison where he remains to this day. He is kept in protective custody, separated from the general prison population, because even among criminals, those who hurt children are considered the lowest of the low. He will spend decades in a small cell, his freedom gone, his life effectively over, even though he still draws breath. The impact of Jessica's murder extended far beyond her immediate family. The case sparked conversations across the country about child safety, about how to protect children from predators, about what warning signs to look for in potentially dangerous individuals. Schools implemented new safety protocols. Parents became more vigilant. Communities organized neighborhood watch programs and safety education initiatives. The Jessica Ridgeway Foundation was established in her memory. The foundation works to promote child safety, support families who have lost children to violence, and fund programs that help identify and treat individuals with dangerous psychological disorders before they act on their impulses. Sarah Ridgeway, despite her grief, has channeled her pain into trying to prevent other families from experiencing what she went through. The case also highlighted the importance of community involvement in solving crimes. It was the tips from observant citizens who recognized Austin from the composite sketch that led police to him. It was his mother's courage in calling police despite the horrifying realization that her own son might be a murderer that ultimately brought him to justice. The investigation was a testament to what can be achieved when law enforcement and the community work together. For the Westminster community, healing has been a long and difficult process. The innocence of this suburban neighborhood was shattered on that October morning in 2012. Parents who had always felt their children were safe walking to school or playing in the neighborhood could no longer feel that certainty. The sense of security that is so essential to a community's well-being had been violated. Memorials were erected to honor Jessica's memory. A park was dedicated in her name. Purple ribbons, Jessica's favorite color, became a symbol of the community's commitment to never forget her and to work toward preventing such tragedies in the future. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, vigils are held where community members gather to remember Jessica and to support one another. The police officers and investigators who worked on Jessica's case carried the weight of it for years afterward. Many of them were parents themselves, and the thought of what Jessica had endured haunted them. They had seen the crime scene photos, heard the details of Austin's confession, and witnessed the devastation of Sarah Ridgeway. These are the kinds of cases that stay with law enforcement officers for the rest of their careers and lives. The jogger who fought off Austin Sigg and whose bravery led to his identification has spoken publicly about her experience. She has said that she struggles with survivor's guilt, wondering why she was able to escape when Jessica couldn't. But she has also found purpose in knowing that her actions led to Austin's capture and may have prevented him from claiming additional victims. She has become an advocate for self-defense training and for trusting one's instincts when something feels wrong. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about the mental health system and how society handles individuals with dangerous psychological disorders. Austin had been to therapists. His family had tried to get him help, but the system failed to identify just how dangerous he was, or if it did identify it, failed to do anything effective to prevent him from acting on his violent fantasies. This has led to ongoing discussions about how to better identify and treat individuals with these types of disorders, while also balancing concerns about civil liberties and the difficulty of predicting who will actually act on violent thoughts. Experts in criminal psychology have studied the Austin Sigg case extensively. It represents a relatively rare type of offender, a juvenile who commits an extremely violent, premeditated murder with sexual and sadistic elements. Most juvenile offenders, even those who commit serious crimes, do so impulsively or in the heat of the moment. Austin's crime was different. It was planned and calculated. He had fantasized about it for months or even years before he finally acted. This raises the question of whether anything could have stopped him. Some experts believe that with intensive early intervention, proper treatment, and possibly medication, Austin's progression toward violence might have been halted. Others are more pessimistic, believing that some individuals are simply beyond help, that their psychological makeup is so fundamentally disordered that no amount of therapy or treatment will prevent them from acting on their violent urges. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. While it's impossible to say with certainty that Austin could have been stopped, there were numerous missed opportunities along the way. If the mental health professionals he saw had been more skilled at detecting his true pathology, if his internet activity had been monitored more closely, if his killing of animals had been treated as the serious warning sign it was, perhaps Jessica would still be alive today. But hindsight is always clearer than foresight, and it's unfair to place too much blame on those who interacted with Austin before his crime. Predicting who will commit violence is extraordinarily difficult. Many people have violent fantasies, but never act on them. Many people show some warning signs, but never hurt anyone. The challenge for mental health professionals, law enforcement, and society as a whole is figuring out how to identify the small percentage of individuals who will actually cross the line from fantasy to action. The technological aspects of the case also sparked important discussions. Austin's computer contained extensive evidence of his criminal intent, including searches about kidnapping and murder, child pornography, and violent fantasies he had written out in detail. This raised questions about internet privacy versus public safety. Should internet service providers or law enforcement be able to monitor searches for certain types of content? Should websites that host illegal content, like child pornography, be more aggressively pursued? These are complex questions with no easy answers, involving a delicate balance between protecting children and preserving civil liberties. For Sarah Ridgeway, life after Jessica's murder has been a daily struggle. She has spoken publicly about her grief, hoping that sharing her story might help other parents who have lost children. She describes grief as a journey with no destination, something that changes over time, but never really goes away. There are good days and bad days, moments when she can smile at memories of Jessica, and moments when the pain is so overwhelming she can barely function. Sarah has had to navigate life without her daughter, facing all the milestones and moments that should have been Jessica's. When Jessica would have turned 13, 16, 18, Sarah marked each birthday with aching awareness of all the experiences her daughter would never have. She would never see Jessica go to her first dance, graduate from high school, leave for college, fall in love, get married, have children of her own. All of those moments were stolen by Austin Sigg. But Sarah has also found ways to honor Jessica's memory and to find meaning in the aftermath of tragedy. Her work with the Jessica Ridgeway Foundation has helped other families and has contributed to making communities safer for children. She has become an advocate for victims' rights and for stricter penalties for crimes against children. She has turned her grief into action, determined that some good will come from Jessica's death, that her daughter's life and death will not be meaningless. The legal proceedings didn't end with Austin's sentencing. There were lawsuits filed against various entities, including questions about whether schools or law enforcement could have done more to prevent Jessica's death. While these suits were generally unsuccessful, they highlighted the broader systemic issues that contributed to the tragedy. In prison, Austin has given occasional interviews to psychologists and researchers studying violent offenders. He has shown little genuine remorse and has instead focused on his own experience of imprisonment. He has complained about the conditions of his confinement and has expressed frustration at being separated from the general population. He seems to have little understanding or concern for the suffering he caused. Some victims' advocates have criticized the media attention given to offenders like Austin. They argue that by focusing so much on the perpetrator, we glorify them and potentially inspire copycat crimes. They advocate for keeping the focus on the victims, on remembering their lives rather than obsessing over the details of their deaths and the minds of their killers. This is a valid concern, and it's one that has to be balanced against the public interest in understanding how and why such crimes occur. By studying cases like Austin Sigg's, by examining what went wrong and what warning signs were present, society can hopefully become better at preventing future tragedies. But this has to be done carefully, in a way that centers the victim and doesn't romanticize or sensationalize the offender. Jessica Ridgway's case has been featured in numerous true crime documentaries, podcasts, and articles. Each one attempts to make sense of the senseless, to understand how something so horrible could happen to such an innocent child. Some handle the case sensitively, focusing on Jessica's life and the community's response while treating the details of her death with appropriate gravity. Others are more exploitative, dwelling on the gruesome details in ways that seem disrespectful to Jessica's memory. For those who knew Jessica personally, these media representations are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they keep Jessica's memory alive and ensure that people don't forget what happened to her. On the other hand, they can be painful to watch or listen to, forcing Jessica's loved ones to relive their trauma over and over again as each new documentary or podcast revisits the case. The case has also become a teaching tool in law enforcement and criminal justice education. It's studied in courses on criminal investigation, criminal psychology, and victimology. The efficient police work, the community involvement, and the forensic evidence collection are all examined as examples of how to handle a complex case. The warning signs that Austin exhibited are studied as examples of what to look for in potentially dangerous individuals. 10 years have now passed since Jessica Ridgway was murdered. Austin Sigg is now in his late 20s, having spent his entire adult life in prison. He will never be released. He will grow old behind bars and eventually die there. Jessica, meanwhile, remains forever 10 years old, frozen in time in the photographs and memories of those who loved her. The Westminster community has moved forward, though the scars remain. New families have moved into the neighborhood. Children walk to school again, though parents are more vigilant than they once were. Life goes on, as it always does. But Jessica is not forgotten. Her story serves as a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of community vigilance, and the need to cherish every moment with the people we love. Sarah Ridgway continues to live in Colorado, though she no longer lives in the home where Jessica grew up. The memories there were too painful. She has tried to build a new life while honoring her daughter's memory. She has said that she carries Jessica with her every day, that in some ways she feels closer to her now than ever before because Jessica is no longer a separate person, but a part of Sarah's very being. The broader impact of Jessica's case on child safety practices has been significant. Many schools have implemented buddy systems for students who walk to school, ensuring that no child is ever walking alone. Police departments have increased patrols in residential neighborhoods during the times when children are traveling to and from school. Parents have become more educated about internet safety and the warning signs of dangerous behavior in young people. Technology companies have faced increased pressure to monitor for and report child exploitation content on their platforms. While concerns about privacy remain, there has been a shift toward accepting that some level of monitoring is necessary to protect children. The balance between freedom and safety is always delicate, but cases like Jessica's remind us why that balance is so important. Mental health services for children and adolescents have also received more attention and funding in the years since Jessica's death. There is greater awareness of the importance of early intervention when young people show signs of violent ideation or behavior. Schools have implemented more comprehensive threat assessment programs designed to identify students who might be dangerous before they act on their impulses. None of these changes bring Jessica back, but they represent the community's determination that some good will come from this tragedy. If even one child is saved because of the lessons learned from Jessica's case, then her death, while still a terrible tragedy, will not have been entirely in vain. The psychological trauma experienced by those connected to the case extends to many people. Jessica's classmates, now young adults, carry the weight of having known her and lost her. Some have said that Jessica's murder stole their childhood innocence and forced them to grow up too quickly. They learned at far too young an age that the world can be a cruel and dangerous place. First responders and investigators who worked on the case have had to process the traumatic things they saw and learned. Many sought counseling or therapy to help deal with the emotional toll. Some developed post-traumatic stress disorder from their involvement in the case. The images and details they were exposed to are things that can't be unseen or forgotten. Neighbors who helped search for Jessica, who held out hope that she would be found alive, had to reckon with the horrifying reality of what had actually happened to her. Many reported feelings of helplessness and guilt, wondering if there was something they could have done differently. Some sign they should have noticed. The ripple effects of one act of violence are far-reaching and long-lasting. Austin Sigg's decision to abduct and murder Jessica Ridgeway didn't just end one life. It fundamentally altered hundreds or even thousands of lives. It changed a community. It changed how parents think about their children's safety. It changed how law enforcement approaches missing child cases. The damage caused by a single act of evil is incalculable. As we reach the end of this story, it's important to remember that this isn't just a story. It's not entertainment or a puzzle to be solved. Jessica Ridgeway was a real child who lived, laughed, loved, and dreamed. She had her whole life ahead of her. She should be alive today. A young woman of 22, maybe in college, maybe starting a career, maybe falling in love. All of those possibilities were stolen from her. Sarah Ridgeway lost her only child, her best friend, her reason for being. She has had to find a way to continue living in a world without her daughter. A task that seems impossibly cruel and unfair. No parent should have to bury their child, especially not under such horrific circumstances. The community of Westminster lost its innocence and its sense of safety. Children lost their friend and their childhood peace of mind. And society as a whole lost another young life with unlimited potential, another future that will never be realized. Austin Sigg sits in a prison cell, and that is where he belongs. He took a precious life, inflicted unimaginable suffering, and traumatized an entire community. His punishment is just, but it is also insufficient because no punishment can truly balance the scales or undo the harm that was done. The only way to give Jessica's death meaning is to remember her, to honor her memory by working to prevent similar tragedies, and to never become complacent about the safety of children. Every child deserves to walk to school safely. Every child deserves to grow up in a world where they don't have to fear predators like Austin Sigg. That is the world we must strive to create, and it is the legacy that Jessica's memory demands. This case reminds us that evil exists in this world, sometimes in unexpected forms. A 17-year-old boy from a seemingly normal family became a monster who destroyed a child's life. It reminds us that we must be vigilant, that we must take warning signs seriously, that we must prioritize the safety of our most vulnerable members of society above all else. But this case also reminds us of the power of a community coming together, of neighbors helping neighbors, of strangers becoming allies in the search for justice. It reminds us of the dedication of law enforcement officers who work tirelessly to solve cases and bring perpetrators to justice. It reminds us of the strength of a mother like Sarah Ridgeway, who has endured the unendurable and somehow found the courage to continue living and fighting for other children. Jessica Ridgeway's story is a tragedy, but it is also a call to action. It challenges us to be better, to be more aware, to be more compassionate, and to never stop fighting to protect children. Every time we hear about a missing child, we should remember Jessica. Every time we see a child walking alone, we should remember Jessica. Every time we have the opportunity to intervene or to help, we should remember Jessica. Her life mattered. Her death mattered. And the lessons we learn from her case matter. We owe it to Jessica, to Sarah, and to all the children who might be protected because of what we learned from this tragedy, to never forget. We owe it to them to keep telling this story, not for shock value or entertainment, but as a solemn reminder of what we stand to lose when we fail to protect our children. The morning of October 5th, 2012, began like any other Friday in Westminster, Colorado. A 10-year-old girl woke to the sound of her alarm clock, watched television, ate breakfast, and prepared for school. Her mother watched her walk out the front door. And then, in the span of just 60 minutes, everything changed forever. Jessica Ridgeway became a name that would be remembered, a face that would never be forgotten, and a reminder of the preciousness and fragility of life. Rest in peace, Jessica Christine Ridgeway. You deserved so much better than what this world gave you. You deserved to grow up, to chase your dreams, to experience all the joys and challenges that life had to offer. You deserve to live. And we, the living, carry the responsibility of making sure that your story is told, your memory is honored, and your death is not in vain. To Sarah Ridgeway, words are inadequate to express the depth of sorrow for your loss. Your strength in the face of unimaginable tragedy is inspiring. Your dedication to turning your grief into action that helps others is remarkable. Jessica would be proud of the mother you were to her, and the advocate you have become in her memory. To the Westminster community, your response to this tragedy, your unity in the face of horror, your commitment to supporting the Ridgeway family and to protecting your children is a testament to the best of what humanity can be in the darkest of times. And to all of us listening to this story, let it serve as a reminder. Hug your children a little tighter tonight. Tell the people you love that you love them. Don't take a single day for granted. Be aware of your surroundings and the people in your community. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And never, ever forget that there are Jessica Ridgeways in every community. Precious children who depend on us, the adults, to keep them safe. This has been the story of Jessica Ridgeway, a 10-year-old girl from Westminster, Colorado, whose life was cut tragically short on October 5th, 2012. May her memory be a blessing, and may we all work together to ensure that no other family has to endure what the Ridgeways have endured. Thank you for staying with us through this difficult story. These cases are never easy to cover, and they're certainly not easy to hear about, but they're important. They remind us of the real consequences of violence, the real pain experienced by victims and their families, and the real work that goes into seeking justice. Before we close, I want to leave you with this final thought. Jessica Ridgeway was 10 years old when she died. She had been alive for just 3,655 days. In that short time, she managed to touch the lives of everyone who knew her, with her kindness, her laughter, and her spirit. She left behind memories that her loved ones treasure, and a legacy that continues to impact child safety practices across the country. If a child of just 10 years could make such an impact in such a short time, Imagine what each of us could do with the time we have. Jessica's story is a tragedy, but it's also an inspiration to live fully, love deeply, and make every day count. It's a reminder that every life matters, that every person has value, and that we all have the power to make a difference in the world. So as you go about your day after hearing this story, carry Jessica with you. Let her memory inspire you to be kinder, more aware, more protective of the vulnerable, and more appreciative of the precious gift of life. That is how we honor her. That is how we ensure that she is never forgotten. That is how we turn tragedy into meaning. If you've made it to the end of this investigation, you're part of something important. You're part of a community that refuses to let these victims be forgotten. You're part of the force that demands justice and pushes for change. I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button to show respect for Jessica's memory. Second, subscribe to Cold Crime Case and turn on notifications because there are more stories that need to be told, more victims who deserve to be remembered. And third, leave a comment telling me how Jessica's story has impacted you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's make sure that Jessica Ridgway's name and story continue to echo through time, serving as both a memorial to a beautiful child lost and a warning that we must do better to protect the children who remain. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of the community that keeps these important stories alive. This is Cold Crime Case, and I'm your host, reminding you that justice doesn't have an expiration date, and neither does our commitment to honoring these victims. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop fighting for those who can no longer fight for themselves.